Hi, Joey.
Oh, Glade, how are you?
Good. How are you?
Doing well,
I
thanks.
just barely made it.
All right.
Barely walked in the door.
Nice.
I was actually in Layton a little while ago.
Well, there's nothing wrong with being just on time, right? Actually, you're even early.
I was in Layton picking up queens. So
Oh, nice. You distribute them for the area then?
um, I've got some nooks out here that I've made, and I'm gonna drop these queens in the nooks and hopefully sell them here in a few weeks. Make sure they're good.
Great.
Are you guys busy yet?
It's picking up. It's picking up. Yeah, we're kind of finally getting some, requests and such. And I mean, winter was busy for us though, because I mean, not all of winter, but some of winter was busy for us because we did those pre-certifications for folks going to California.
Oh, are you still doing that?
Well, we did it years ago. It was called the Voluntary Ant Certification Program, and it didn't really help folks all that much. But they kind of have a new program now, and it's called Apiary Pre-Inspection, and they actually have the California inspectors come out and they're kind of training us on how to do these things. And for everyone that participated, they said it really went well for them. The truck drivers really liked it. They just said that they basically like handed them some paperwork, they had to sign something, and they drove right through. And so
No.
it was kind of peace of mind to have knowing that they weren't going to be stopped.
Be stopped and inspected and turned back because they got a dirt clod on their pallet.
Exactly. But yeah, things are picking up. I bet you got lots of club members starting to email you and call you and stuff, right?
Yeah, I'm getting more and more questions.
Well, I'm glad you're keeping this going. Every county, every area should have a bee club. It's really unfortunate for folks that live in areas that don't have a bee club. They really struggle, the new folks getting into it. They really have a hard time.
And for Duchesne County and Uena County, this is pretty much it. Uena County had another group going, and the person that was kind of spearheading that one, his health isn't great, and so he finally got where he just couldn't do it anymore. So I've been trying to keep this group going, and we get people from both counties attending, and I was doing them in person, but it's hard for everybody to travel on a consistent basis. So this year
Oh yeah.
I decided, okay, we'll try it over Zoom and see if it works better and see if we can reach a few more people. I like the in person. I think you learn a little more, but this is okay.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think the in-person, interactions, you don't get that with virtual, but the basin's a big place, so I get what you're saying. Having to, for some folks just getting off work or whatever, traveling all, 30, 40 minutes, it's kind of a lot for them.
Yeah, I'm in Roosevelt, and so anybody from Vernal, that's a 30-minute drive. And
Yeah.
if they're from Jensen, it's more like 45, 50 minutes at least, probably closer to an hour. And if they're the other way towards Duchesne or Altamont, they're 30 minutes away. So it's just kind of hard for them to travel that far. So we're doing it over Zoom, and
Yeah. Yeah. Nothing wrong with that.
nobody said that they don't like it yet. So I'll keep doing it. Well, we've got a few people here. Frank, I assume that's you.
Yeah, that's me.
Just so everybody knows, I invited Joey Caputo from the state to join us for just a little bit tonight, and um, I appreciate Joey spending his evening with us for a little while. I guess we'll go ahead and kind of get started. Joey, I'll let you kind of introduce yourself as and what your role is with the Utah Department of Agriculture and Food.
Great. Well, yeah, thank you, Glade, for inviting me here, and thanks to everybody that's attending tonight. I'm Joey Caputo, and I have been a state bee inspector since 2013 with Utah Department of Agriculture and Food. And Glade just asked me tonight to kind of present what our program's about, some of the problems that we commonly see, or ones that you should just be aware of. And I do have a little presentation here for you. As we were talking earlier, it's the in-person interactions are kind of a lot more fun because you get people more engaged, but we can still do that with Zoom. So, if you have questions or you have a comment, just stop me. It doesn't have to be real formal. So I'll go ahead and present what I got for you, and then feel free to just be part of the conversation here. Everybody see that okay?
Yes, I do.
Great. All right. So, yeah, this is about the state's apiary program that I work for. And what I think is so cool about this program is just the history of it and how long it's been part of Utah history. I like to say Utah's a pioneer in bee health. And that's because when honeybees were first brought to, at that time, the territory of Utah, not even the state, there were a lot of problems with disease. And these were just known as foul brood diseases. They didn't even know in those days that there were two different types of foul brood diseases. And if you're not sure what foul brood is, we'll talk a little bit about that in a bit. But basically, they're diseases that affect the baby bees and made it difficult to keep the hives alive. And as a result of that, the beekeepers basically petitioned this fellow, Professor A.J. Cook, who was with Michigan Agricultural College and knew his fair share about bees. They invited him to the state to help them with this issue. And basically what he suggested is that they needed to form an association very similar to what you have here, like a bee club. It's called the Utah Beekeepers Association. And that organization is actually still with us today as well. You can join that, and they have a convention every year. Glade goes to it, and maybe some of you do as well. And that association basically lobbied the territorial legislature to pass the first bee law in the country. And what it basically allowed was for counties to appoint bee inspectors that would go around and help beekeepers identify disease problems and mitigate those problems. And it's kind of amazing. I mean, it's over a century now that this has been around, and we're still here today. The modern program, though, is a little bit different. Now, in addition to county inspectors, there are state inspectors, and we basically help out the county inspectors when they are busy, but we also take care of counties that don't have a county inspector. So for folks in Duchesne County, you actually do have a county inspector. His name is Todd Walker, and I'm happy to give you his contact information if you like. But Uinta County, you don't have one. And so that means that myself and the other state inspector, Jenna Crowder, we are here to help you. So what is it we actually do? Well, I like to say we do house calls. We basically will come to your apiary and go through your bees with you and teach you about the different diseases and now pests that we commonly deal with. We have testing services. So we basically have a lab in Salt Lake County that processes samples that we send to it. And this lab is state-of-the-art, gold standard testing equipment. We use PCR to do our diagnostics. And we're really proud of that because, testing protocol that was prior to that, which it wasn't quite as accurate. And so we're really happy that we have that for the beekeepers. And then we also do what's called health certification. So if you are a migratory beekeeper and you need to take bees to another state, some states will require that the bees be inspected prior to that. And different states look for different things. But basically, we can inspect those here in Utah so that they can take those hives to other places. So I'm just going to go over two things in some detail that we want you to know about. The first is called American foul brood, And this is a pretty rare disease. It has become more prevalent in recent years, but it is something that we do want you to know about because it's an awful disease. It's highly contagious, and it contaminates the beekeeping equipment. And this disease and another disease called European foul brood, that's essentially what started this program. So it's kind of incredible to think, but over centuries past, and the reason that the program was formed, we're still dealing with the kind of the same problem. That being said, we've got a lot more tools to work with, and we have a lot more knowledge about how to prevent and manage these diseases. So that's the good thing. But if you haven't ever heard of American foul brood, here is a picture of a brood frame. And by every number, there's an example of a symptom that you'd see with it. So at number 1, there is that what says black scale. And so those are the dead larval remains that are dried up of bees that have, baby bees basically, that died of American foul brood. And when you have American foul brood, you'll start to see this scale kind of pile up, so to speak, in the hive. Now, something I should make you aware of is that scale can be caused by other diseases, things like European foul brood and parasitic mite syndrome, which is associated with roa mite. So that's not something we can just take to the bank and say, oh, we got American foul brood, but it is something to keep an eye out for. Number 2 is the dead ropey larva. So you'll see there's like a little toothpick here, and that toothpick was pushed down into a brood cell, and when it was pulled out, it essentially came out like glue. And so that is a sign of American foul brood. It can be a sign of European foul brood. However, with American foul brood, that ropiness tends to be a lot more stringy, so to speak, than with European foul brood. You also just get some of these generic problems that can be associated with other beekeeping maladies, things like a spotty brood pattern, sunken caps, perforated caps, and a foul odor. So there's overlap with this disease and other diseases. And, that's why we're here and why we have a lab, is we can help you to determine whether you have this or not. So a lot of folks say, well, what can I do to prevent from getting American foul brood? And the good news is there's a number of things you can do. One is when you buy bees, you can ask for a health certificate to see that they basically had been inspected prior to when you buy them. The other one is to register as a beekeeper. And if you have 20 or fewer hives, this is really cheap, $10 a year. And I guarantee you get more than $10 of value out of it. But basically, by being registered, we will let you know if American foul brood is in your area. And that can help you just to know that it's in the area. But also, if you want to maybe use an antibiotic as a prophylactic measure, you can sometimes take that to a veterinarian, our notification that foul brood's in the area, and they will sometimes, depending on the vet, they may be able to prescribe you that. Beware of used equipment. This by far is the most common way we see people get American foul brood, is that the bees die of American foul brood. The beekeeper doesn't really realize that. They decide just to get out of beekeeping. And so, they put boxes and stuff on sale on KSL for a really good deal. And it turns out it's not that great of a deal. So, with used equipment, what I would just say is, buyer beware. If you are going to buy it, I would highly recommend that you have an inspector look at it before you actually buy it. And then that way you're not held with a bunch of bad equipment. Other things you can do is to put away unused equipment. You don't want your equipment to get robbed out by other bees that may have foul brood spores on their bodies and bring it to you. You definitely don't want to exchange potentially contaminated equipment with an uninfected hive. So if you see something in your hive and you're like, I wonder if this is American foul brood, it's best to stop what you're doing. If you need to get into another hive, clean your hive tool, sterilize your gloves or wash your gloves or whatever. And basically you don't want to move the problem to the next hive. And then, keeping your tools clean and don't share. I say share ideas with other beekeepers, don't share your tools. So with American foul brood, the basic ways to manage it are destruction. So there's you burn the hives, or you can do what's called deep burial. And those are like the most surefire ways of controlling the disease. And the reason why you would burn or bury the equipment is because the American foul brood pathogen creates a spore, and that spore is very resilient against environmental stressors, so cold and heat. So, the temperature can get, 110 degrees, or it can get below 5 degrees or whatever, even lower, and that spore is going to survive. And basically, it's just waiting for new bees to be introduced into the hive, or into those boxes. And then once it's introduced, the bees will become infected again. There are other treatments options, though. There's antibiotics. And if you catch an infection early enough, this can be a successful management tool. However, you will have to continue using antibiotics for the life of that equipment, because those spores will continue to remain. And the antibiotics don't actually kill the spores, they basically just suppress the disease. So American foul brood, I don't mean to scare people. It's very unlikely that you're going to come into contact with that in your beekeeping career. However, we do like to point it out because we want people to know about it, and we want to keep it rare. And education is one of the best ways we can do that. But the next pest that I'll talk to you about, you most certainly are either dealing with it, or you will deal with it, or have dealt with it. There's really no way of getting around this one, and that's the varroa mite. And I'm sure Glade has been talking a lot about this, and your club has talked a lot about it. But this chart will show you basically, the varroa mite levels from last year, and basically as an average of those that we sampled, what percentage of bees were infested with varroa mite based on the month. And if you look at these months, early on May, June, July, these levels are pretty low. And so what that tells me is, we're doing a good job of controlling mites in the spring. But when we start getting to the August, September, October months, they start to get high. And, one thing I would just like to throw out there as a question to folks is, does anyone here know kind of where you want to keep your mites below in order to promote survival of the colony? That's okay. That's okay if you don't know. So basically, you really don't want your mite levels to exceed 3% at any given time. And so really the best time to you want to prevent them from getting to 3%, basically. So a lot of times if you read a bee book, or just sometimes older literature, will talk a lot about fall mite treatments or fall mite management. And if you're trying to manage your mites in the fall, meaning September, October, you are probably too late. So, especially in the later months, I mean, later part of the month, if you're looking at late September, you're more in this 3% or above area. And then October, you're way beyond it. Whereas in August, we're still below that level. And so what I would encourage folks to do is to really pay attention to their bees starting in August. And this ties in really nicely to the next slide. Winter preparation, I like to say, begins in August. And the reason for that is basically winter bees, those are the ones that go through the winter, and they're different than your summer spring bees. Those bees don't live as long as winter bees. Winter bees are the ones that live for months. And whereas, your summer spring bees live, 30 to 45 days. Well, winter bees live for months if they're healthy. And those are the ones that carry your colony through into the next year. However, if these bees are infested with mites and therefore viruses, that we're just introducing that as an idea, but basically these mites transmit viruses as well. They're kind of like mosquitoes in a way. And if you've got a heavy infestation of mites and they're basically transmitting viruses to bees in late summer, they often don't survive winter. And if you've ever had a colony where you were like, you had a warm day in January and you saw bees flying in and out, and you maybe popped the lid and looked in there and you go, wow, everything looks great. And then all of a sudden in March, though, they're dead. That likely was a heavy mite load in the fall. And you may be going, well, wait a minute. What if I got rid of those mites in the fall? Well, the problem is you may have got rid of the mites. You didn't get rid of the viruses. And if you think about a virus reducing the lifespan of a bee in a warm month, you may go from 30 to 45 days down to something like 20 to 30 days. But if you extrapolate that to winter, where the bees are supposed to be living months and months, that virus has that same proportional effect. And so while they may be able to make it to January, they're not going to make it to March or April. So try not to let your mites exceed 3% of the bee population August through October. It's super important. And then make sure you have no mites going into winter. And basically our motto, we have a 3-step plan here for you. Measure, so check your hives for varroa mite at least once a month. Treat, so basically if you have mites in excessive levels, then use a miticide. And then repeat. Don't assume that just treating one time is going to take care of your problem, because what often happens is you will get rid of the mites in your own colony with the treatment that you've done, but you may be surrounded by other honeybee colonies that haven't received the same treatment. And as a result, when your bees who are healthier go to take advantage of the weakness in their hive due to their mites, they end up bringing back mites with them. And so not only do you have to sometimes treat your own bees, the mites in your own colonies, you sometimes, so I really encourage folks to continue if you are treating. And I will just note myself, I have to treat 3 or 4 times, usually between August and November, in order to get the mites really under control. I don't want to spend too much time on this because I know I'm running out of time, but there's various measurement methods, to check for mites, and I'm sure this club has talked about them, but I'll just give you my 2 cents on them. There's sticky screen and drone sampling. And sticky screen is basically just this little sticky sheet you put under your hive if you have a screen bottom board. And drone sampling is just where you use a comb or a pick to take out some drones and you look for mites. I think this is better than doing nothing. However, it doesn't really quantify like the percentage of the colony that's infested. And so it's kind of harder to make mite treatment decisions based on this. What I think is a much better method is using an alcohol wash or powdered sugar roll. And I'm sure you all have gone over this before, but there is a fact sheet on our website if you want some instructions. And there's some great YouTube videos as well. Doesn't hurt just to have that if you're doing it for the first time. There's also a lot of varroa treatments. And again, I don't want to spend too much time on these, but I'll just go through some of these and tell you maybe some things to know. The first 3 that I'll review are conventional mite treatments. So these are synthetic, what they call it, acaricides. And the first one, Apistan, the second one, Checkmite, and the third one, Apivar. So the first 2 have largely gone out of favor because of resistance issues that the mites have to the products. Apivar, with the active ingredient Amitrez, is continuing to work. However, there have been recent documented cases of resistance. So just keep that in mind. If you're not really big on, synthetic, mite treatments, there are what they call organic or plant-derived or naturally derived treatments. And so Apigard being one of these that has thymol as an active ingredient. Apilifar, which also has thymol as an active ingredient. It also has eucalyptus and menthol. This is a really easy, both of these are really easy to use mite treatments. And especially this last one doesn't seem to get used quite as much. but I think it's a good product. Mitoway and Formic Pro. So again, this is a naturally derived one, formic acid being the active ingredient. You by label and by law, you cannot be using these products if it's above 85 degrees. So this is a spring and fall treatment. If you were to have mite levels that you needed to take care of in August, this would not be the product to go to. You would want to go to the Apivar or the thymol-based products instead because they can be used at higher temperatures. HopGuard, we're actually on HopGuard 3, not HopGuard 2 anymore, but this product basically can be used with honey supers on. It's kind of a very sticky mite treatment, and it works best if the bees are broodless. So it doesn't work, you can use it with honey supers on, but it actually has less effectiveness than if you were to wait until very late fall or very early spring. It's kind of more of a cleanup treatment. The same is true of oxalic acid. The two legal methods to use, I should say, are the dribble method and the vaporization. And both of those can be used with honey supers on. However, both of those methods are most effective when the colonies are broodless. I won't get into how to extend the release, but that is an option that people are using right now. But just know that if you're using vaporization or the dribble, it's basically a cleanup method. It's something you would use in very late fall or early spring to kind of get rid of any mites that were left behind by treatments that you've already done. There's a whole host of other pests and diseases that I just don't have time to chat with you about, but chalk brood, nosema disease, European foul brood, tracheal mites, that one's very rare. We don't really see much of those anymore. Sac brood virus and wax moths. But these are all pests and diseases that as bee inspectors, we can help you to identify and give you advice on how to deal with them. And so in closing, I'll just leave you with the contact information. I will note that if you are a registered beekeeper, you will be getting a postcard in the mail fairly soon. And Jenna and I basically will have about 3 days that we are available to Uinta Basin Beekeepers. We'll basically be able to come out and do inspections if you like. What I note though about that is if you are concerned you have American foul brood or you're thinking about buying used equipment, you can make an appointment outside those pre-assigned dates. Just give us a call and let us know. We don't want you waiting in a situation like that. We'd rather make sure you get taken care of in a timely manner. And I just want to thank you so much for inviting me to present. I don't know if there's time for questions or not, but I'm happy to answer any if there is. Oh, I think you're on mute.
I'm on mute. If anybody's got questions, go ahead and unmute yourself and you can. Joey, do you happen to know approximately when your window for coming out here in the basin is going to be yet?
I don't, but as soon as I find out, I will let you know. Yeah, in fact, I might be able to get you that information tomorrow.
Okay.
I just need to check in with Jenna because she's the one making the schedule. So.
Hey, Joey, you mentioned that you might have Todd Walker's contact information. Can you give that to us?
Absolutely. Yeah. So let me put that. Is there a chat? Let's see. Chat. Let's see. Let me just put that in here. Okay. Okay, so here's the Duchesne County Bee Inspector Todd Walker. There's his phone number and his email. And I encourage you to give him a holler if you have any concerns. I'd also just note, a lot of times folks, if they've never heard of this program or they've never heard of us, some of the terminology and some of the ideas can come off as being a little frightening, the like inspector and burning hives and things like that. And what I'd just like to ensure you is this program is of, by, and for beekeepers. The people that work for this program, the people who wrote the law, we're beekeepers, and we care a lot about the beekeeping industry and the community in this state. And so, while we have regulatory responsibilities, we don't consider ourselves bee police. We consider ourselves a partner with the community and the industry, and our goal is to help create an environment that is one in which bees can thrive, and we don't have severe pest and disease problems that are making it difficult to get good honey yields and keep bees alive, year to year.
I think I asked you one time out at the Utah Beekeepers Association how many tickets you'd actually written since you've been there.
Yeah, as far as tickets go, 0. Yeah, nobody's ever gotten a fine that I know of. But yeah, it's like I say, we're just we really don't want to be viewed as policing the industry. We want to be a partner with the industry and the community. So,
and I would definitely say that you guys have done a great job of that. I've had before Jenna, there was Steve Stanko, and I've had Steve out to my apiary a couple of times doing, I think you were doing surveys for, can't remember which survey you were doing.
I think it was National Honeybee Survey.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah.
And just having him come out was very educational for me. So I appreciated it. So I encourage anybody that would like to have these guys come out and look at your hives, take advantage of it. There's a second set of eyes, and sometimes that's very helpful.
Absolutely. You know what? Usually I have my county bee inspector come out. I either have Jenna or I have my county bee inspector come out to look at my hives every year, just because I miss things. I'm not perfect. No one is. And so I always have someone come out and check my hives, just because I feel like I get a better idea of what's actually going on. So, yeah, if any of you haven't had a chance to register and want to, I'll just put, that's a link that you can use to get that. And like I say, if you're registered, you'll get our postcard in the mail, and it'll tell you the days that we're available. So feel free to give us a call. And yeah, Glade, if you're interested in doing that survey again, I'm going to be working on those in the next few weeks. So I don't know if that's of interest to you.
Yeah, I could probably do that. I liked it because it gave me some information about my hives that I wouldn't get otherwise. So I like doing it. So,
and for those who maybe don't know what we're talking about, it's called National Honeybee Survey. If you have 8 or more hives, you're eligible. And we basically take samples out of at least 8 hives. If you have more, that's fine. We just do a random sampling. But we take samples of bees, adult bees, larvae. And then depending on what type of survey you do, sometimes we do pollen or wax. And basically you get a report that tells you what viruses you have, if you have nosema disease, and if you participate in the wax sampling, then you get pesticide residue information. So, but you have to have 8 or more hives to participate. And so if you're interested in that, just give me a holler and let me know.
yeah,
and I'll put my info in here just in case you didn't screenshot it.
You can definitely go ahead and just put me down and let me know when's going to be a good day for you, and we'll see if we can schedule that.
Great. That sounds wonderful. Well, all right. If there's no other questions, I just want to thank everyone, and hope to see you this season.
Thank you, Joey. I appreciate your time.
Okay.
Good information.
Y'all have a good night, okay?
Okay.
Bye.
You too, Joey. How's bees doing for everybody?
They're doing well. Did you get your queens to take on those splits you did?
Yep, they're right here, sitting on my desk. The the queens they came out of California, obviously. It's the only place to get queens this time of year, but I was working with a beekeeper out on the Wasatch Front, a commercial beekeeper, and he had them ordered. And I was going to go pick them up last Friday. And just before I left, I texted him and he said, "Oh, don't come." They didn't get shipped because they had such rainy weather in California that the queen producer couldn't even go out and pick queens out of the hives. He said it was just pouring. And so they didn't get them until today. In fact, I just barely got back like 2 minutes before we started. So I have 12 queens here. It looks like I'm going to have 12 ducks if anybody's interested in 12 more ducks if anybody's interested with them. So my hives I've got some hives that are so big. I decided I had to do something or I'm going to be, they're going to be wanting to swarm on me. They're too big. They're way too big for this time of year. If, a month from now, that I would say, yeah, they're about right. But to have them this big, this early is I'm not sure what to do with them. So it's going to be kind of a challenge to keep them from swarming on me because that's what they're going to want to do. They're not quite ready to do it yet, but as soon as we start getting some good nectar flowing, then they're going to want to do that.
Yeah, that I was in mine today, and boy, they're bursting at the seams. I mean, they're ready to go. I seen drones in the purple eye stage about 3 or 4 days ago. So yep. I haven't been back in that hive to see if the drones have hatched out yet, but they were ready. As soon as those drones hatch out and like you say, any nectar flow, what I'm wondering is if I'm feeding them sugar water, is that kind of stimulating the flow? I might have them swarming here without a flow.
I think it kind of depends on how fast you're feeding it to them. If you're kind of trickle feeding it to them just to kind of keep them going, maybe not, but.
I dumped a gallon in in less than a week, it was gone.
Yeah. I did on a few of my hives too, about 2 weeks ago. And when I got back in, it was all gone. There wasn't a drop left.
I don't know. We'll see, I guess.
Hey, Glade,
Yeah.
Awesome. Did you decide to go with the ordered in queens? Just a little too early to do walkaway splits on them?
Yeah, I think it's too early. We're just now getting drones, and I don't like doing splits early. You have to realize those queens still have to mate. If you did a walkaway split now, basically she's going to be emerging here in about 16 days, right? Or less, probably 13 days by the time you count that they'll start from a larvae stage. So you've already 3 days as an egg. So in 13 days, in 2 weeks, she's going to emerge, and then she's going to wander around the hive for a day or two, 3 or 4, and then she's going to want to mate. So, we're kind of looking at 18 days from now. What's the weather going to be like in 18 days? And will we have enough drone population at that time that she can get mated well? And those two variables just for me are so unknown that I think it's a risk to do it this early.
Yeah, that was kind of my thinking. I got a few that need split also, but I was going to wait for a little warmer weather and let the drones get out and the pollen flowing, and
yeah,
just a little better situation.
I think we're going to be early this year. Everything feels like it's early. But I'm still not ready to do a walkaway split yet. That's why I pulled I pulled bees and brood out and made nooks, and then I ordered these queens, and I'm gonna go drop these queens in. I was gonna do it before I got on this call, but that didn't happen. So they'll probably go in tomorrow.
So who'd you get your queens from? Who's the producer?
I don't exactly know who the producer is. I was working with Richard Homer.
Okay.
They're the same, same queens that he uses for his commercial operation. They're Italians, but they should be good queens. I mean, he says he's used this particular breeder for several years now, and he says he's had good luck with them. In fact, he was out there making packages. When I was out there, I pulled into his bee yard, and I was there for less than 3 or 4 minutes, and my truck's just covered with bee poop. Just covered. It's a mess.
Do you ever have problems with those nukes getting them to accept that new queen where they're already probably producing emergency cells?
I
had trouble with it last year.
I made these nooks up on Thursday with the intent that I was going to drop the queens in on Friday, but that didn't happen. So they've been, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, and now it'll probably be until tomorrow before I can get these queens in. They will have definitely started emergency cells, and I'll have to go through the frames and tear every one of them down before I introduce the queen. The other thing I'm going to do to hopefully help with that introduction a little bit is I'm going to give them a little bit of a pollen patty, not a whole big one, but a piece of one, and then I'm going to give them some syrup. The bees are a little more accepting if they feel like they've got plenty of resources coming in. So, and I did make them up with mostly what should be mostly nurse bees. So, and mostly capped broods. So what brood's going to be emerging are going to be young bees, and young bees are much more accepting of a queen than the older bees. The older they get, the less accepting of a queen they are. So.
Yeah, I really fought that last year and didn't have very good luck with it. And I don't know if it was the size of my splits. My splits were just one medium box with 10 frames in it. And I don't know if that had anything to do with it or not, but they did not want to accept that new queen.
Sometimes if there's too many bees in those splits, they don't want to accept that new queen because there's too many old bees. And with a smaller colony, they're a little more humble, I guess, and a little more accepting of a queen coming in.
Yeah, I wondered that.
Just like old folks, they don't want to change.
I had several people ask me if I would go over, swarm control and what you can do for swarm control. Is that what you want to talk about, or do you want to talk about something else?
That'd be great.
All right, let me.
Top is good, but I'd like you to come and split them for me.
Just come do the split.
I've kind of tried a little of everything with that swarm prevention. I've checkerboarded frames, I've switched brood boxes, and I've about decided that when they want to swarm, they're just going to swarm.
And you're not far from right.
Yeah, the reproductive urge is prevalent.
Everybody see that?
Yep.
All right. So let's just kind of set the stage here a little bit for some swarm biology. So we're all kind of on the same page here. All hives, their goal is to swarm, right? The goal of every beehive is to eventually swarm. That's how they reproduce. And they're going to do that when conditions are right. And that's usually, that means spring. So what happens is they start increasing drone production, which is exactly what I'm seeing in my hives right now, is increased drone production. They're making drones. Of course, that's normal this time of year for any hive to start making drones, but especially the bigger hives, that really starts to increase as they decide, okay, we want to swarm, we need drones, which I find a little bit interesting because the queen that comes from that hive doesn't want to mate with the drones from that hive. So, but I guess if they figure we're making drones, somebody else out there is making drones too. And that's probably true from, swarming usually takes place during a major nectar flow. So we don't have any nectar coming in yet. So the bees are unlikely to swarm yet. But as soon as we start really getting some nectar coming in the door, then they're going to kind of go into that next phase, that next step of, okay, yeah, we think we want to swarm. They just need to have enough, excuse me, enough nectar stored to really support both colonies, both the swarm, because the swarm's going to engorge themselves on the nectar before they leave, but they've also got to leave enough nectar resources for the bees that are left behind, because those bees they're going to lose most of their foragers. And if they can't go out forage, then they can't bring in the nectar they need. So there's got to be some nectar stored in the hive, or they're less likely to swarm. That doesn't mean they won't swarm without nectar in the hive, but they're less likely to swarm if they don't have nectar stored in the hive. So swarming usually takes place during a major nectar flow. That's going to, for us, is really going to start hitting here in 2 to 3 weeks. We're going to start getting nectar coming in. Maybe earlier this year, maybe not. Depends on what the weather does to us. So with the swarm, the original queen, and usually somewhere around half and maybe as much as almost 3/4 of the bees leave with the swarm. And typically some of the older bees will leave with the swarm and leave a younger cohort of bees in the hive. But if half your hive leaves with the swarm, now your hive population is obviously half that, but your hive population is really out of balance. And beekeeping and a beehive, a good healthy hive, is really about keeping a balance, a stable balance of everything. So a stable queen, the right number of bees, and not just the right number of bees, but bees of the right age. Just remember that as bees age, their duties in the hive changes. And in order to keep that balance in the hive, then you need to have the right balance of bees between young nurse bees and older foragers and everywhere in between to keep the hive functioning well. So the original hives left with queen cells, capped. So if you get in your hive and you're seeing capped queen cells, there's a good chance your hive's already swarmed. Once they cap those queen cells, they are more than committed. They're going to swarm if they haven't already. So you might have missed it by a day already. And sometimes that's not always as easy to recognize that your bees have swarmed, because if you're checking your hives kind of during the middle of the day, well, a lot of the bees are out foraging during that time. And so you might not even really recognize that your bees have swarmed on you. And the only way to do that is to go through the hive and see if you still have a queen. Do I still have eggs If I don't have eggs, then my queen's gone, and she's been gone for at least 3 days. By the time they've capped those queen cells, you're too late. At that point, if you still have the queen in the hive by chance, you need to do something immediately, or they're going to swarm on you. And that usually means pulling that queen out and some of the bees with her and knock the population down. And we would call that an artificial swarm. It's really just like well, I'll get into it a little bit here later, but how to do that split. But it's really just like a walkaway split, other than you now know where the queen's at. Overcrowding in the hive is something that's going to kind of push them more into swarm mode. If the hive's just too crowded and they're having a hard time getting around because they're bumping into each other, there's just no room for everybody, that's going to be one of those triggers to start a swarm or start that process. So just the sheer number of bees, but it's not just the sheer number of bees, it's room to store things, room to store incoming nectar and incoming pollen, and room for the brood. There's no room for the queen to lay eggs. This can all kind of happen at the same time. If you have a whole bunch of bees in the hive and those bees are out foraging and bringing back nectar and pollen, and they're storing it in the hive and they don't have any place to put it, then the queen, they start putting the nectar and the pollen in the brood area where the queen needs to be laying eggs. And so now the queen can't lay eggs like she needs to. So you have this kind of compounding problem. Have too many bees, they're foraging like crazy. They don't have any place to put incoming resources. And so they put it in the brood nest. And now the queen doesn't have room to lay eggs. And that whole process just kind of compounds on each other. And that's when the bees say, okay, we have to do something. And their answer to that is, let's swarm. The other thing that happens is the queen pheromone levels, because there's so many bees in the hive, that queen pheromone just gets diluted down to the point where as they're grooming each other and touching each other, part of what they're doing is spreading that queen pheromone. And as the queen wanders around the hive, she has her feet, she spreads her own pheromone where she walks. So the other bees can sense that queen pheromone, but if she's getting crowded where she doesn't have room to lay and they're kind of confining her, then she can't walk around like she usually does, and her pheromone levels don't get spread around the hive enough. That's another signal that's to the bees that, hey, it's time to swarm. Older queens tend to swarm more than younger queens. Typically a young queen that was just raised, like this year's queen. These queens that I just got, they were raised this year. They're brand new queens. They're 3 weeks old. They're unlikely to swarm. So if you've got a brand new hive this year with a new queen that's this year's queen, they're unlikely to swarm. And I look at it as, it's not just, it's queens that have gone through 2 springs. That second spring for a queen is, to me, is when they want to swarm. If you buy a queen, if you started your hive this year with a brand new queen, it's unlikely to swarm this year, but come next spring, that's her second spring. And if the hive's done well, then then they're going to want to swarm. But if you got a queen maybe later in the summer, if you got a queen in July that's raised a queen in July, which is actually late June, the second half of June into July is when I usually raise my queens. So I get summer queens. And those queens that following spring, that's their first spring. And they're less likely to swarm. That doesn't mean they won't, but they're less likely to swarm because that's their first spring. They're still a young queen. Now, the following year after that, though, then they really are going to want to swarm. We really have three approaches here that we can take with helping these bees or encouraging the bees not to swarm. We can deal with the number of bees they have simply by removing some of the bees and moving them to a different hive. We can make sure that there's plenty of space to store, not just to store nectar, but pollen, and make sure that there's plenty of space for the queen to lay eggs. Giving the hive extra space can really help with the swarming instinct. And then just keeping a younger queen in the hive is also helpful. Now, any one of these three is not going to guarantee that they don't swarm, but they help. They're bees, they're going to do what they want. And like you say, once they've kind of gotten their head that they want to swarm, it's really hard to break them of that without just splitting the hive. So swarm prevention really starts about 4 to 6 weeks prior to normal swarm season. I've always considered swarm season for us in the basin to start about the 1st of May and then go clear through about the middle of June. To me, that's when I see my hives wanting to swarm the most. So I need to start 4 to 6 weeks prior to that, which is right now. So right now, what I'm trying to do, and that's why I've made some splits, is I've reduced the number of bees in some of my hives by splitting some of them off, and giving the queen more room to lay and more space for resources to be stored. So one of the ways you can deal with a swarm is just to do a walkaway split. And walkaway splits are really easy. You can kind of look through the diagram. Really, all I'm doing is taking the hive, not really worried about finding the queen, and I'm just going to kind of split it right down the middle. Whichever hive gets left in the original location, though, just kind of be aware that that hive's going to get most of the foragers come back to that location. So it's going to kind of get, it'll have a bigger population after everything's kind of settled back down again. The foragers will move back. Now, what we call an artificial swarm is just like a walkaway split, other than you know where the queen's at, and you're moving the queen out of the original hive into a different hive and letting the original hive make their own queen. You can wait, and this gets a little tricky, and if you miss it, then you're in trouble. But you can wait until the hive starts to make queen cells themselves, and you're getting queen cells, not just a queen cup, but a queen cell. So there's actually an egg or a larvae in the cell. And once you see that, then you make your split. Pull your queen out and move her to a different hive with a couple of frames of brood. That way, you know that the original hive is, they're in queen making mode before you do that. But if you wait too long, if you wait 2 weeks before you do an inspection, you might miss the whole thing and the bees will swarm on you. So if you're planning on using queen cells or swarm cells made by the queen, you really need to be checking your hive like once a week and getting in there and checking all the frames and saying, oh, no swarm cells yet, no swarm cells yet. Oh, now I'm seeing swarm cells. Time to make my split. And usually when they make swarm cells, they're going to make multiple on multiple frames. They're going to, not just 1 or 2, they're going to make 7 or 8 or 10 or 12. And once I see that in a hive, then I'll pull the original queen out move her to a nook box. And I'm gonna look at those swarm cells and I'm gonna cull out all but 2 or 3 of those swarm cells. I'm just gonna tear them down, use my hive tool and mash them. And I want to get down to where I only have 2 or 3 cells, because if you leave 12 cells in the hive and you have 12 queens in the process, sometimes that hive will still swarm and then swarm again and then swarm it again. And the hive really just kind of swarms itself to death. The population drops every time they swarm. But if you'll cool down those queen cells down to the best looking 2 or 3, then the hive kind of goes, oh, we only have a couple of chances here. We're not going to take off and leave. And because you've pulled the queen and some of the bees with her and moved them off, that gives them the feeling that they have swarmed, because the original queen's gone and our population dropped. To them, that says, oh, well, we must have swarmed. Oh, we have a queen cell here. We're going to finish raising it. And hopefully that new queen gets, emerges and goes out and mates and then comes back and everything's all good. And if it doesn't, though, well, you still have the original queen off to the side in a nook. Now you can just recombine the nook back to the original hive and you're back in business. And that's, by the time that happens, the bees are usually kind of out of swarm mode. They're kind of back into this mode of, oh, well, that didn't work. Time to regroup and figure out what we're doing now. Oh, now you've reintroduced the original queen. They go, oh, we do have a queen now. And hopefully by that time you've given enough space and they kind of lose that swarm, that desire to swarm. So making a split is sometimes the only way to prevent a swarm. Like you said, Cade, you can reverse boxes. So in the fall, this blue circle is kind of is really the cluster. Typically, we have the cluster down in the bottom box is where we like to think it's going to be. And then we have frames of honey on each side of that cluster. And then the box above that cluster is all full of honey, ideally, right? By spring, that cluster's kind of eaten their way through their stores and they've moved up into that upper box, but everything below them's empty. Sometimes it's completely empty. There's nothing down there. There's no brood. There's really very few bees and there's no honey. That box is just empty. So what you can do is just literally pull the bottom box out, throw it on the top. And now the bees have this feeling of, we have extra space above, I call it above their heads. It's really above them in that upper box now. They have all this extra space to expand that brood nest and store resources. So what happens is that brood nest now really starts to expand. The queen has lots of room to lay and they have room to store incoming pollen and nectar. Does this stop swarming? No, but it may delay it. And it may delay it long enough to kind of get the bees past what some people call the swarm cutoff date. There seems to kind of be a date in the year. And for us, I think that's somewhere mid-June-ish. Maybe it's the summer solstice. Maybe it's somewhere around there where the bees say, okay, we haven't swarmed yet. If we don't swarm by this date, we're shifting gears and we're going to switch from swarm mode to storage mode. And if you can kind of get the bees delay that swarming long enough and get them kind of past that swarm cutoff date, then they make that switch and they go into storage mode and say, okay, we need to store. And they kind of abandon that idea that they're going to swarm. And regardless, as long as you keep enough boxes and give them enough room on the hive, then they'll make honey. And that's really what most of us really want, is for them to make honey. There is a bit of an issue if you reverse these boxes. Sometimes that cluster hasn't moved all the way up into that second box, and they're kind of right in the middle. Some of the clusters down into the bottom box and some of the clusters up in the top box. And really what matters is where's the brood. As long as the brood is all in the top box, then you can do a reversal. But if there's some brood in the bottom box, as well as brood in the top box, so the top part of the bottom box and the bottom part of the top box, if there's brood in both those areas, if you do a brood reversal, then all of a sudden you've separated the brood and you've made two sections of brood. You've got now a little bit of brood up here in what would be the top box now if you did the reversal, and most of your brood down in the bottom box. But this top little patch of brood up here in the second box might not be enough brood to really attract enough bees to keep it warm on cold nights. And we're still having cold nights. So you can lose that little bit of brood. It'll just chill and die if they can't keep it warm.
Yeah.
So that's one of the risks of doing a brood reversal. Just be aware that you don't want to separate the brood. So if I see this in my hive, then I'm not going to reverse the boxes. And sometimes if you just leave them, the queen will automatically, she'll just move back down into the bottom box and start laying in the bottom box again. Sometimes she does, sometimes she doesn't. So your other option is to kind of give the bees more space for incoming nectar primarily. And this is a method called checkerboarding. Oh, I think it's in the American Bee Journal was his original articles, but I think it's on Bee Source. There's a website called Bee Source. If you look for Walt Wright, Walt has passed away a few years ago, but he wrote several articles. I think it was in the American Bee Journal on checkerboarding and what he did to help alleviate the congestion in the brood area. So here's kind of our hive configuration at the end of winter, first of spring. Again, we've got most of the bees up in the top box. The bottom box is empty, and there's usually not much down in the bottom box at all. And really what starts to happen is as those bees start to bring in more and more nectar, they start backfilling from the top down, typically. So they'll start filling up the top box with nectar, which pushes the queen down into the bottom box, which is fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But if the nectar comes in too fast, which happens during a major nectar flow, then they start backfilling the bottom box as well. And now the brood area for the queen gets smaller and smaller and smaller. What we're going to do is open up this brood area for the queen to lay in and keep it open. If she's restricted, then they feel like, okay, it's time to swarm. And because she's restricted, then they feed her less and she starts to skinny up. And when she skinnies up, she has to skinny up a little bit so she can fly. So they start running her around the nest because there's no room to lay. So what we do is we add another box, and we checkerboard the honey supers, not the brood. We leave the brood in the bottom box, and we leave as many open comb in the bottom box as we can get. Pull out all the extra honey, and even sometimes you've got to pull. If I've got some hives that have a full 2 frames of just solid pollen, both sides. You need to move that pollen out of the middle of the brood nest, move it to the edges, and replace it with drawn comb, not just foundation. Foundation doesn't do anything for the bees. They don't see that as extra space. They need drawn comb. So this really only works with drawn comb, empty drawn comb. So the second box, we checkerboard. So we put an empty drawn comb and then a frame of honey, and then an empty drawn comb and a frame of honey. And we do that all the way across. You can put a queen excluder on if you're using queen excluders. If you're not, you don't have to. And then we give them another box and we checkerboard that box as well, kind of opposite of the one right below it. So if we started on one side of the box with an empty drawn frame, in the next box up, we'll start with a full frame of honey and then an empty drawn. And so full, empty, full, empty, full, empty, all the way across. So now I have two boxes that are alternating between full and empty frames, full honey frames and empty drawn comb frames. What that does is, as soon as the queen sees this extra space, even in the second box, she'll want to move up there and start laying. And as soon as she does, the bees go, hey, wait a minute, we have honey in our brood area. They don't like honey in their brood area. And they'll start moving that honey out of the brood area and moving it up above the queen excluder, hopefully. And by doing that, it further opens up that brood area and now gives that queen two boxes to lay in. And we've moved all of that honey up. Now you could probably accomplish essentially the same thing by just going back to, maybe back to here, reverse the brood box, and let the queen start laying in that second box, and then add a third box onto them and pull all of the full honey frames up into the third box, and essentially leave the bottom two boxes just empty drawn comb, and not kind of go through the whole checkerboarding process. I think that would work as well. I've done this checkerboarding and quite like it, but you have to checkerboard just the honey, not the brood, especially this time of year. We don't want to leave brood, one frame of brood by itself. I want at least 2 or 3 frames of brood next to each other, because it's too much of a risk for that brood to chill. So that's kind of what the idea with checkerboarding is. You have to have drawn comb though, and you're checkerboarding just the honey, not the brood. And sometimes you have to go back in and kind of do it again. And so what you're really doing is just making sure that brood area, the queen always has a couple of frames to lay on, no matter what. And sometimes that just means pulling even brood frames and pulling them up above the queen excluder temporarily to open up that brood nest and never let that queen feel like she's being restricted in laying. And it can be very effective of controlling swarming and still keep all the bees in the box. And what you really end up with is a huge colony that's going to make a whole bunch of honey. That's really kind of what I do for swarm control. It's not completely fail-safe, but it works if you get the timing right. You have to start early. If you're already seeing swarm cells, then checkerboarding is not going to work. They're already in that mode. So really, the idea of keeping the brood nest open starts now. Does that make sense?
Yep, sure does.
Anybody have any questions? Any Frank, do you do anything different for swarm control? I mean, there's other things you can do, but essentially you're doing one of three things. You're either making sure your queen is a young queen. You're either going to split her off with some bees and brood and therefore reduce congestion, or you're going to give the hive space so that they don't feel like they have to swarm. That's really the way you control swarming, is do one of those three things. You either deal with the queen, deal with the population of bees, and that usually kind of happens together. You're going to pull the queen, pull some bees, pull some brood, drop her in a different box, or you give them extra space to fill up, so they don't feel like they have all this extra space, especially kind of over their heads in the upper boxes. They don't feel like they can swarm because they feel like, well, I don't have enough resources yet.
I usually use the extra space thing. Checkerboarding for me doesn't work real well. Seems like
It's tricky to get just right. And I've done it sometimes and I thought, well, that didn't seem to really help, but I've done it other times and I think it's more of a timing issue of getting it done at the right time. I've done it other times and it's worked really well. So I get it. It's not a fail-proof method. But I think most of it has to do with just getting that timing just right. And sometimes I get it right and sometimes I don't.
most of the time I'm late.
Yeah. And I think that's my problem too, is I do it too late. I think, oh, I can wait until next time. Oh, I'll wait one more time. And then it's too late. So what I'm trying to do this year, because I've got hives that are just bursting at the seam, is I'm going to really try and watch how much space does the queen have to lay in? Does she have 2 or even 3 frames down in that bottom box that she can still lay in? And really just try to keep that brood nest open for her and move anything else that doesn't need to be there out. Like if there's a honey frame still down in that bottom box, I'm going to pull that honey frame up above the queen excluder and push any pollen frames to the edge. Pollen kind of acts as pollen and honey kind of act as a barrier for that queen. And that usually kind of signals the edge of the brood nest. So if you've got pollen frames kind of in the middle, what I like to do is push those pollen frames to the outside. And then if I've got honey frames on the outside, I pull them up above the queen excluder. And then replace any frames that I've moved with empty comb. Empty foundation, the bees don't look at empty foundation as space. You can throw a whole box of empty foundation on a hive, and they just, if they don't see that as, oh, we have room to build and make, they don't see it that way until they've started to draw comb on those foundations. They don't view them as extra space. That's why it's hard for the new beekeeper, because you don't have drawn comb. Drawn comb just becomes so valuable, especially this time of year. If you can give that queen empty comb to lay in, you can sometimes hopefully head off that swarm.
Yeah, I'm at the point now where I've about decided it's the queen thing. I got to keep newer queens in those hives, and so I've got everything this year I'm gonna try grafting queens and replacing those queens in June, kind of like you do. And I've got a cloak board. I've been studying on that.
Yeah.
Try that method, I guess.
I like doing it that way. I like raising my queens. I usually start about the 10th of June-ish, give or take, maybe even the 5th of June, depending on what my schedule's like. That way, that queen's going to come, she's going to mate after the summer solstice. Something about that summer solstice and new queens, when she does get mated and comes back, she lays like crazy. She lays like a brand new spring queen and carries that nest a little further into fall, keeps laying a little further into fall, which helps that winter bee population stay nice and big. So I like doing it that way. Some people don't. They prefer to, replace their queens first thing in the spring. This making nooks this early in the spring is a little new for me. I'm not used to doing that. I usually make my nooks that I overwinter with about the 1st of July. And I'm dropping those queen cells that I started in the middle of June. I'm dropping those queen cells in my nooks that first part of July, maybe the end of June, first part of July. And then I just let them build up from there to the end of the season.
Have you used a clipboard glade?
I've not used a clipboard. It's really just a double screen board, right?
Yeah, it's got a queen excluder in it, and then it's got a piece of sheet metal that you can slide in to
Oh, yeah, that's right. It's a little
make the
bit.
upper section seem queenless. And they claim 2 days after those queen cells are started in the upper section, you can pull the sheet metal and make the hive queen right again, and they'll still produce those queen cells.
Mhm.
Not sure if it'll work, but I'm going to try it, I guess.
You'll have to let us know how that works. I've seen it, but I haven't really played with it. I mean, I get the concept. Basically, you're putting a divider in there in your hive, and you're pulling brood up above the cloak board so that they have something to raise the queen with. And then you're sliding that divider in the middle, making them that upper half feel like we're queenless. We have to do something. So what do? They start raising queens and building queen cells. And once they've started those queen cells, then you pull the divider board back out. And now with that, is there a screen board or is it a queen excluder between them? It looks like a queen excluder.
Yeah.
And now all the bees from the bottom of the hive can all intermingle. They can bring resources up to help care for that brood that's in the upper half of the hive, care for those queens. You'll have to kind of go through once you've slid that board in and left them for a couple of days, then you're going to kind of have to go through every frame in that upper section to see if they've started raising queen cells and how many. And depending on
Yes.
how many you want, if they've raised queen cells on 5 different frames and you want 5 different queens, then you're in great shape. But if they've raised 12 queen cells all on the same frame, now what are you going to do?
Yeah, I'm just going to probably wipe those cells out. I'm going to have them on my grafted cells, and hopefully that works.
And you could easily do that too. Like I say, you can buy just the little JZBZ queen cups and just graft 3 or 4 of those and stick those in that upper box.
Yeah. That's what my plan.
Yeah, that'd work just as well. Should work as well. You'll have to.
And there's some reversal. The bottom box, you reverse the entrance to the back side of the hive, and there's some moving pieces to it, but we'll try it.
Yeah, it can be a little bit of work, but some people like it that way, and have great results with it. So you'll have to let us know how it turns out.
Sure.
I'm still gonna wait, even though we're early this year. I'm gonna wait to start raising queens, probably till June. Once we get past Memorial Day, then I'm less concerned about weather. And I know there's plenty of drones out there by that time. And so I'm not concerned about the number of drones. That's just me.
So when yaks come back, go ahead. When yaks come back with their bees, I wonder how many drones they've got in their colonies. They're back already. That's why I was wondering.
Yeah, they should be back already. I noticed quite a bit of activity over there at Yaks as I've driven past in
Well,
the mornings.
As I went to Duchesne today, I know where there's a yard over there on the south side between Duchesne and Roosevelt, and I see the hives there. There's one over by my daughter's in La Pointe, and I see that they've dropped the hives there. So they've spread them at least somewhat.
They're home then.
They're home.
They should be home by now. Yeah, it's 1st of April.
So when they come back, I was wondering, it might be. And what happens? I guess we could try and see if we could raise a queen or two and see if there's enough drones floating around if you're close to one of their yards.
Yeah, I would think they would be raising drones already.
Well, I would think since they come back from California, I'm almost certain they would be. Now, how much they suppress the drone rearing in their colonies, I have no idea. But
I bet they're not even looking at it that much. Yeah, there might be plenty of drones out there. I just don't know. I guess.
Yeah. I'm like you. I don't want to chance it. So.
And I've talked to a couple of guys that they're always so anxious in the spring to raise queens and do splits that I think they start too soon. And they're trying to head off swarming, which I get, and I'm trying to do the same thing, but I decided I don't want to risk trying to do a split and not have a well-mated queen. So that's why I bought queens and brought queens in. All right, anybody else have anything else you want to talk about?
I was just wondering about, I think you said once we need to rub beeswax on foundations that aren't drawn out. Is that what we do?
If you have some beeswax, if you rub it on that foundation before you put it in the hive, the bees will want to build on the foundation a lot better.
Okay. And can it be beeswax that we've had from other hives, like when we extracted honey?
Sure.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, you can rub it on there. I usually melt my beeswax down, and I usually have some little blocks, very big, and I just use them like a crepe and just scribble right on top. You don't have to get tons, some. The other method,
Okay.
melt the beeswax and use a paintbrush or use a foam roller, brush it onto the foundation lightly across the. You're not trying to fill all crevices, just the edges foundation. Those X edges. You're trying to get a little more wax.
Okay. All right.
That will help those bees dry out that foundation.
Okay. So yeah, we checked a few weeks ago and found our queen, but we didn't see very much brood, and we put a pollen patty in, and then we went back to check the food and they still had food, but we were waiting for a warm day to get back in the hive. So this week we can go get back in.
The next couple of days is going to be nice, but it sounds like it's going to get windy after that. Warm, but windy. So if you can get in, and your hive should be raising brood.
Okay.
You should have 3, 4, 5 frames of brood.
Okay.
If you're not seeing that much, you're not seeing a good. How many bees did you have? How many frames were covered with bees?
Well, we just had one box, and so I think maybe 6 or 7 full frames. I think the 2 outside ones didn't have anything at all, but all of the middle ones did.
Okay, so that sounds like a decent cluster of bees. If there's 6 or 7 frames of bees, then you probably should have 3 frames in the middle of that's got brood.
Okay. Well, we didn't check all of the frames. We stopped when we saw the queen, but the frames we did check didn't really have anything, and maybe we just didn't look close enough to see eggs, but I don't think we saw any capped brood.
You should have capped brood by now.
Okay.
This is like what was it, a week ago?
Yeah, a week or
This
two
is-
ago.
This is about a week and a half ago. Check. We haven't got into it. Well, that's why we need to go back and look. So
Yeah, go back and look. You should have capped brood.
okay.
Okay.
I've got hives that have 6 frames of capped brood.
Wow.
Hmm.
And if they
Okay.
don't,
Yeah.
if
But my
we don't
hives are,
find any,
you know, they're in a different state than yours.
yeah, yeah. Okay. So if there's no cat brood, then what? What does that mean?
Is there larvae there? Maybe your queen's
Okay,
just
we get this
started
voice.
late. It's possible,
Okay.
you know, if she's a carniolan, maybe she's just not ramped up yet.
Okay,
Okay, that's entirely possible. But I would,
well, I mean,
you should have some fruit.
okay, we'll look, we'll find out, so.
Okay.
Okay, other than that, I think we're just moving right along with them.
Good. Yeah, it looks like the weather's gonna be nice, but looks like we're gonna get that afternoon every day for hate the wind.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, any other questions?
Not really.
Well, if you don't have any other questions, I'll let you go.
Sounds good. Thank you for getting Joey on with us, Glade.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I'm gonna try and get a few other people on. I'll probably talk with Richard or Seth Homer and see if they'll kind of show us what they do in their operation. Maybe not, maybe next time, maybe it'll be the one after that. We'll see. They're busy right the moment. They're making packages and nooks right and left. That's what he was doing. He was waiting for those queens to show up so he could drop them in the package. He's made up. He sells quite a bit of packages. All right, coming on.